This podcast is brought to you by Reynolds and Reynolds, the industry leader in automotive technology. Learn how Spark AI, Reynolds' unified AI data layer, can help you unlock your full potential by visiting rayray.com/spark-AI. That's REYREY.com/spark-AI.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, September 16th, 2025. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, a fifth of all auto suppliers topple into financial distress. GM shuts down its Chevy Colorado plant for 3 weeks due to a parts shortage. And Ford plans to cut 1,000 jobs at its German EV plant. Plus, in the second and final part of our exclusive interview with General Motors CEO Mary Barra, she talks about growing manufacturing challenges and how hybrids fit into future product plans.
We're going to be positioned to compete well, but also be good stewards of our owners' capital and how we deploy R&D dollars.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. At least 20% of automotive suppliers are in financial distress. On top of that, parts maker executives are more pessimistic about business conditions than they have been in years. That's according to 2 recent studies. An analysis of the automotive supply chain by financial analytics firm Rapid Ratings found that about 1 in 5 automotive suppliers were already in financial distress before the impact of tariffs began to be felt. It also found that tariffs, as they stand, could lead to a 23% increase in the number of distressed suppliers. Meanwhile, a recent survey by MEMA found that the average business sentiment of supplier executives is at its lowest level since 2009, during the height of the Great Recession. That's with the exception of 1 quarter in 2020. General Motors will idle its mid-size pickup plant in Missouri for 3 weeks starting this month. The automaker says that's because of a parts availability issue. Employees at GM's Wentzville assembly plant will be on temporary layoff from September 29th through October 19th. That's according to UAW Local 2250, which represents workers at the plant near St. Louis. A person with knowledge of GM's plans told Automotive News that about 3,800 employees will be affected, with some stamping and body shop functions continuing. And Ford says it will cut up to 1,000 jobs in electric car production at its factory in Cologne, Germany, due to weak demand. In a statement, Ford said, quote, "In Europe, demand for electric cars remains well below industry forecasts. It says the factory will switch to a single shift from January 2026. Ford said it would offer voluntary layoff packages to affected workers. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. In recent days, we've been talking a lot on the show about automakers slowing EV production and cutting staff. Last week at Automotive News Congress, Director of Technology and Innovation Coverage, Hannah Lutz, spoke with experts about the state of electrification and what comes next. In this clip, we'll hear from Elizabeth Creer, CEO of the Center for Automotive Research, and Jeff Morrison, Senior Vice President of Global Purchasing and Supply Chain at General Motors. Here's a piece of their conversation.
So we all know that EV transition has slowed with reduced federal incentives and shifting policies. How is the industry responding both for the near term and then also competitively for the long-term outlook? Elizabeth, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of start with the grounding of policy and the impact on the market. So if we think about 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, policy was aligned with the EV transition, right? Consumer incentives, investment in charging and manufacturing. There was a willingness to accept independent state zero mandates and even penalties if automakers don't meet prescribed fuel economy criteria and emissions criteria. Now, fast forward, everything is being recalibrated and the market is responding. From a consumer standpoint, EV sales are actually up this year, and particularly this quarter. There's somewhat of a buy now before October 1 mentality. So we're really going to have to watch what happens in Q4. But the reality is that the barriers to adoption, affordability, and infrastructure are still very real. And without public funding, those challenges become harder to overcome and could slow down. And we know through history, right, incentives were never meant to be there full time. We saw that in Germany, 55% reduction when the incentive went away. We saw it earlier this year in Canada. And so now we're seeing automakers. We're seeing them pull back on delaying some of their EV launches, pulling back on some of the capacity investment. And meanwhile, China, and to a lesser degree, the European Union, they're outpacing the U.S. in EV adoption. And the risk goes beyond just the pace of EV adoption in the U.S., but these countries are also bringing to market low-cost EVs at a much faster pace. So the risk to the U.S. is losing the competitive edge in the next generation of automotive technology.
So Jeff, how are you, or how is GM and your suppliers that you work with really preparing for this change?
So I think the focus is really, it's long-term planning for sure, but we want to have the short-term flexibility to really meet the market where it's at. So from a supply chain standpoint, we want to make sure with our partners we can support ICE versus EV at whatever mix that is for our great vehicles we have in both. At the same time, ensuring that we meet the customer where they're at that point in time. And we're really proud of the work that we've done from an EV supply chain standpoint to really build out the ability to do batteries all the way back to critical minerals and processing here in the U.S. And I think that work continues and that will continue to evolve. And then from an ICE standpoint, we want to be able to work with our suppliers to really have that flexibility and try to industrialize them in a way that we can help mitigate some of that uncertainty risk between the ICE and EV mix.
Jeff Morrison is Senior Vice President of Global Purchasing and Supply Chain at General Motors. Elizabeth Creer is CEO of the Center for Automotive Research. They spoke with our own Hannah Lutz at Automotive News Congress, along with Elaine Buckberg, Senior Fellow at Harvard University's Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability. You can hear more from that conversation on this week's episode of Shift, a podcast about mobility, available now wherever you get your podcast. Coming up, the second and final portion of our exclusive interview with General Motors CEO Mary Barra. That's next on Daily Drive.
As your business gets more complex, it feels like productivity can't go any higher. You need a way to move forward to a future where you don't have to start every interaction from scratch. You don't have to search for actionable information. You don't have to manually pull data to make decisions. You need a future where the complex is made simple and you can do more with less. How do you get there? It all starts with a spark. Unlock your full potential with the next generation of automotive dealership technology that actually does some of the heavy lifting for you by texting leads, transcribing calls, making data-backed recommendations, and boosting your overall productivity so that you can spend your time and energy on what truly matters, selling cars and growing your business. Spark AI, Reynolds' unified AI data layer, can empower your dealership to operate more efficiently and effectively than ever before, so you can do more, sell more, and make more. To learn how Spark AI can help your dealership reach its full potential, visit rey.com/spark-AI today. That's REYREY.com/spark-AI to learn more.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. On yesterday's show, we brought you the first part of Automotive News' exclusive interview with General Motors CEO Mary Barra. She sat down with our own Lindsay Van Hully and Nick Bunkley after last week's Automotive News Congress, where she gave a keynote interview on stage earlier in the day. In the second and final part of the conversation, Barra talks about how shifting policies in Washington are affecting GM's manufacturing strategies and product plans.
Now on stage downstairs, you talked about, you mentioned like a couple decision points over the last few years that you kind of would go and see, how things are going, and then just decide, what the market's telling you. Can you talk a little bit more about what that might mean?
Well, I'm not going to get into what the specific models are, but as we were planning a new program, how many different versions of the vehicle did we do? We had those choices that we could make, but we didn't have to make them the minute we started the program. And so we literally told the team, hey, tell us when you need this decision from us to keep it on track. And, they came in and we had a lot more information a year, 15 months, 18 months later to say, okay, with this information, this is the decision. And I think that kind of shows the agility that we've developed at General Motors of it's not just here's the plan, go execute and don't pay attention to anything else that's happening around you, but let's continue to be able to adjust. There was a point in time in my career where we'd work on the portfolio plan going forward, and we would do it. It was an annual process. Trust me, it's not an annual process anymore. But again, I'm proud of how we can sense and respond and make those decisions as we go forward.
Yeah. And I guess on the other side of, if you're able to produce and sell, ICE Silverados and Tahoes and Escalades and the things that generate the profits that have supported a lot of the company over the years. And is that also a positive for
I think that's a huge positive. Continue to serve the market from a heavy duty, light duty trucks for both Chevrolet and GMC, the Silverado and the Sierra, as well as our full size utilities with the Tahoe and Suburban and Escalade and the Yukon. And also we have a strong franchise from a crossover perspective. When you think about the Chevy Traverse and the Buick Enclave and the GMC Acadia. So we are well positioned. And even in our small cars, when you look at the Chevrolet Trax, Trailblazer, and the Buick Enclave and Envista. So I think we're really well positioned with our internal combustion engine platform. And it is a huge opportunity for us to be able to sell more of those as the regulatory environment changes. So again, we'll make the adjustments we need to respond to the market as we continue on our journey. We believe growing EV sales, albeit at a different rate.
And maybe give you a chance to have the EVs be a little more profitable by the time that people
exactly
have more of them.
Exactly. We're not stopping our work on continuing to improve profitability. So it's a great point.
You talked a minute ago about waiting to get to that point where you have to make a decision and how that is happening much faster. How much more complicated has product planning gotten right now? Is there a lot more frequent pivots, a lot more changes in a plan that made sense 18 months ago that maybe doesn't fit where the demand is going now?
Well, I think, if you go back and you say 18 months ago, that was, we were on a path where we were working to a 2030 goal with fairly stringent emission standards. In fact, even with the previous administration, I was, making sure they understood. My view was they were getting ahead of the customer with where the regulatory environment's going. I think that's a dangerous point in a situation like this. And so obviously there's been some reassessment of not only what we build, but where we build it in this past period of time. But again, I think we're more able to look at what's happening in the marketplace. We're learning a lot from our EV customers, looking at all that information. And again, we've become much more agile and flexible at being able to respond and make, whether it's not 180-degree decisions, but it's a 10% tweak here, a 20% tweak there.
Obviously are looking at a longer runway for internal combustion engines. You've said that EVs remain the North Star. Mm-hmm. Hybrids have been on the table, and I wonder sort of how they fit into the plan going forward as part of that broader powertrain mix.
Well, we've said, we haven't announced specifics, but we said we will launch some hybrids, but I think we have to stay focused on the fact that it wasn't even 10 years ago, there were a lot of hybrids in the market and the sales went up and the sales went down. What we have also seen from plug-in hybrids, there's a lot of data. People buy a plug-in hybrid and they never plug it in. And so I think there's still a lot to learn from a hybrid perspective. And you also have to step back and understand that then that vehicle has two propulsion systems on it. So that inherently makes it more expensive. So we're going to do the right hybrids that we think are important for our portfolio. But I also think we have a very strong EV portfolio and a very strong internal combustion. And in some cases, our regular internal combustion engine gives you better fuel economy and overall driving experience. So we're going to continue to, I think we're going to be positioned to compete well, but also be good stewards of our owners' capital and how we deploy R&D dollars.
How do you look at that demand curve for hybrids? You talked in the past about how it went up and then went down. We're still seeing a lot of demand for them right now. Do you see that carrying on for a few more years? Do you think that your hybrids would arrive on time for that? Is that something that you think you'll be able to launch into that curve?
I think we'll have them at the right time, and I think there's still a lot to learn. So it's obviously one of the areas we're watching closely. But we've had hybrids in the past. We understand the technology, so we're very capable of doing this.
You mentioned engines, and I want to ask about the V8 situation that's happening now. And I want to ask it, I think, through just looking across the industry. GM is not the only automaker that has had recalls and trying to work through warranty issues and problems with the big engines. And I'm wondering, when you think about maybe a higher level, do you see anything that links those? Is there something, whether it's, COVID and engineers working from home, or maybe a shift to EVs where the focus hadn't been on engines entirely? Is there something that you think links that, or there might be some contributing factor across the industry when it comes to, the issues that are coming up?
And I don't have the information to pinpoint it on one specific thing. I think, what we're doing now, because everything, the engines are very complex, transmissions are complex, the vehicle is complex, is we're working hand in hand with our suppliers to make sure they're leveraging and using the same type of process control that we use, sharing lessons learned, et cetera. So we're really working with their supply base and then working across the company as a top priority to make sure, because one of the things we've seen with quality issues is once you have one, just the cost of repairing is much higher. We're working on all aspects of it, but I can't pinpoint to say it's because of this or because of that. I think there's a lot of complexity in our business. I just can tell you what we're doing at GM, and we're looking at all facets of it. We've had a couple very specific issues that ended up being large from the population, because in some cases we didn't have the right ability to say, okay, when exactly was the change made? So we're always going to do the right thing for our consumer. But I would say, as I look across our quality systems, I have a lot of faith in them. We've had a couple special cause type issues that we're doing the right thing for the customer.
And I know that you're investing, you mentioned this earlier, in developing that next generation of the V8. And, when you look at how that work is happening and really from the quality perspective, kind of how you're working now ahead of that launch to get that, to get the launch correct, the quality correct, to deliver the engine that you want for customers right off the bat.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing. We always, anytime we learn something from something that we have in the field, we make sure we not only make sure in the next version of it's going to be fixed, but we do what we call a read across, and we do that across the globe. And, also our engineers dig it into and say, okay, this happened, what could be something that might be related to that? So I'm really proud of that process, because it's one thing to have a problem. It's another thing to have it the second time. So that's the work the team does by standard process.
So I mean, when you look at gasoline engines versus EV powertrains, for a long number of years recently, the shift obviously has been to spend more resources across the industry in electric powertrains and not as much on gasoline engines. Are you at GM or in general in the industry, are you seeing that change more where people are going back more toward combustion engines, or was that always happening?
Well, I can't speak to what everyone else is doing. I think, we had regular engine programs. We have great engines in our vehicles. And so it was really a focus of how do we continue to improve from a performance perspective, from a emissions perspective. And we had, very specific programs that we had planned to do, because even in the previous regulatory world, we still planned on having these vehicles into the 2035 timeframe. And there's a lot of time between now and then. There was, and there still is, for us to, so I've stopped the world of predicting what's going to happen. But so we were making the right investments already, knowing that we were going to have another decade. and potentially that might be longer. But I think we had already made those plans, and we're feel good about where we're at from investing in a internal combustion engine technology perspective.
To close, you've talked on stage about this being a complicated time, but also an exciting time in the industry. There's the shift to electrification, a lot of the work that GM is doing around software and autonomy. When you take a step back and you think about all of the different areas you're investing in and the things you're working on, what do you see as the biggest growth areas for GM? When you look at where you want the company to be, what are you focused on now that you think are the biggest areas really where that's going to happen?
Well, I would say a couple things. One, first of all, it's all on a car. So it all starts with having beautifully designed vehicles with the right technology, right safety, the right attributes, and feature functionality. But with that, I'm very excited about what software can do. I think we're at the early days of the vehicle is a software platform. And how do we continue to add things to it that make the customer's life easier? We can do things unique with having the information and what's happening in the vehicle. So there's so many things I'm excited. I'm not going to share our future product roadmap, but I'm excited about many of those things. And then ultimately with autonomy, very proud of Super Cruise. It's, award-winning driver assistance technology. We've integrated, as we set out to do last fall when we made the announcement that we were not going to continue in the robo-taxi business, but, having integrated plan with our Cruise team and the GM team. So I'm excited about autonomy and how we're going to continue to add features on our way to full autonomy. So I think those are a couple things I'm really excited about. But again, it all starts when someone buys a car.
Yeah. And if I could just ask also on those topics, for a big portion of our audience, the dealers, how do you think of, the franchise network fitting into you're talking about all the software and autonomy and things that, on the surface don't necessarily seem to involve that transaction that's happened for, so many years at the dealership like it used to. How does that,
well,
how do you work with that?
I think a lot of, Super Cruise as a technology, it's a technology on a vehicle, and ABS was a technology that, went across the industry and across all vehicles. I think as I reinforced, nothing happens to you sell a car, and they're our very strategic partner in selling vehicles, servicing customers, making sure they have a phenomenal experience. I'm proud of our dealers across the board that we continue to outperform from a sales, service, and satisfaction perspective. So I think our dealers are going to continue to be an incredibly important key partners in the future of General Motors.
Mary Barra, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own John Irwin, Lindsay Van Hully, and Hannah Lutz for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on electrification, supply chain, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair, Yoo-Sun Chung.
Our government and U.S. government, they are working closely, and the visa regulation is very complicated, and I hope we can make together a better system.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.